The nervous system is composed of the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. This is the system that our body uses to communicate with all of the cells in the body. One of the important components of the nervous system is our system of reflexes. These are automatic responses to certain changes in our environment. The neuron is the basic cell of the nervous system. The large part of the cell, where the nucleus and most of the cytoplasm is located, is known as the cell body. Extending from the cell body are numerous branching structures. These are known as the dendrites. This is the part of the cell that is receptive to incoming information. The one long extension from the cell body is the axon. This will be the transmitting process for the neuron. Here you see a couple of neurons. There's the cell body, dendrites back here, and here is an axon. The axons of the peripheral nervous system have a myelin sheath. This myelin sheath is composed of Schwann cells. Individual cells wrap themselves around the axon. Now the cells do not overlap, but there are little gaps between the cells. These are known as nodes of Ranvier. Impulses that travel along the axon will travel more quickly along a myelinated axon than an unmyelinated axon. When the impulses reach the end of the axon, we have the axon terminals. This is the part of the axon that will communicate with the next cell. As we look at the brain, we notice that the brain has these ridges on it. The ridges are known as gyri. Singular is gyrus. The little grooves in between the gyri are the sulci. Singular is sulcus. The central nervous system, both the brain and the spinal cord, are hollow. These hollow spaces in the brain are known as ventricles, and they're filled with cerebrospinal fluid. There are four major parts of the brain. The largest, most superior part of the brain is the cerebrum. Tucked under the back is a piece that looks a little bit like cauliflower. That's the cerebellum. Then in the center we have the diencephalon, and at the very bottom of the brain we have the brainstem. The cerebrum can be divided into four lobes. The lobes are named for the bones above the parts of the brain. So we have the frontal lobe that is under the frontal bone. The parietal lobes will be under the parietal bones. The occipital lobes will be under the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe will be under the temporal bones. Looking from the base of the brain, you can see a couple of important nerves. The olfactory bulbs are where the olfactory nerves come out. This is our sense of smell. The optic chiasma is where the optic nerves cross. The optic nerves are coming from the eye, they come back and they go all the way back to the occipital lobe, and this is where the optic nerves cross. From the side, there is a structure at the base of the cerebrum. This is known as the corpus callosum. This helps connect the right side of the brain to the left side of the brain. This is an important feature in how your brain functions. Hanging off the bottom of the diencephalon is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is under the control of the hypothalamus, which is part of the diencephalon, and the pituitary gland then controls all of the glands of the endocrine system. In the roof of the diencephalon is the pineal gland. This is one of the endocrine glands. This gland secretes melatonin, which is important in our sleep-wake cycles. The brainstem has three major parts: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. In the medulla are some of our most basic centers for life, like the cardiac center and the respiratory center. As the medulla leaves the brain, it becomes the spinal cord. The spinal cord has spinal nerves coming off of it, and the spinal nerves are named for the regions of the spinal cord. So we have the cervical nerves that come off the cervical vertebra, the thoracic nerves that come off of the thoracic vertebra, the lumbar nerves will come off of the lumbar vertebra, and then the sacral nerves will come out of the sacrum. When we look at the spinal cord in cross-section, we see that there is a lighter part and a darker part. The darker part is the gray matter and makes sort of a butterfly shape in the center of the spinal cord. Surrounding it is the white matter. The spinal nerves come off of the spinal cord. In the center of the spinal cord we have the hollow space. This is known as the central canal. This is a continuation of the ventricles of the brain, so cerebrospinal fluid is found here. The gray matter is divided into the anterior horn and the posterior horn. The dorsal root of the spinal cord comes off of the posterior horn, and the ventral root comes off of the anterior horn. The dorsal and ventral roots merge to make the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves have both sensory and motor neurons in them. The ventral root is carrying motor information away from the cord to effectors, and the dorsal root is bringing sensory information into the cord to go to the brain for interpretation. The dorsal root ganglion is a good way to tell which one of the roots is the dorsal root. This swelling on the root tells you that that is the dorsal root. As the spinal nerves come off of the thoracic region, they go directly along the ribs and go to the muscles between the ribs. Here they control those muscles and pick up sensory information from the rib cage. However, the other nerves come off of the spinal cord and interweave, and they emerge as separate nerves that have components of several different spinal nerves in them. The nerves of the upper part of the cervical nerves make up the cervical plexus. These nerves will go to the neck and shoulder region. The lower part of the cervical nerves make up what is called the brachial plexus. The brachial plexus will form the nerves that go to the arm. Coming off of the lumbar and the sacral region, we have the lumbar plexus and the sacral plexus. The lumbar plexus nerves will go to the anterior portion of the thigh. The nerves from the sacral plexus go down the back of the leg to the lower leg and the foot. Reflexes are rapid, predictable, and involuntary responses to stimuli. These help us maintain homeostasis. Reflexes help you keep your balance when you suddenly misstep, for example. An autonomic reflex will control smooth and cardiac muscle and gland activity. Somatic reflexes will control skeletal muscle activity. Reflexes are arranged in what's called a reflex arc. A reflex arc has to have a stimulus get it started. A stimulus is picked up by a receptor. This receptor will use a sensory neuron to take the information to the central nervous system. There will be an integration center there. The integration center will process the information very rapidly and will send information along a motor neuron to an effector. Here we see the stimulus of a pin being stuck in the skin. The receptor would be the pain receptors here in the skin. That sensory neuron will take the information into the spinal cord. This is where the integration center is. In the integration center, a motor neuron will be activated, which will take information to a skeletal muscle. So this would be a somatic reflex. This skeletal muscle will contract so that you withdraw from the sharp stimulus. Remember that somatic effectors will only be skeletal muscle, so we have a somatic reflex shown here. Autonomic effectors will be the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, or glands. For example, you sweat when you get hot. You don't think about that, that just happens. It's a reflex to being hot. That's an autonomic reflex telling your sweat glands to produce sweat. Stretch reflexes are some reflexes that are pretty easy to check. Checking the stretch reflexes makes sure that there are intact motor connections in the spinal cord. The effectors will be skeletal muscle, so these will be somatic reflexes. All you need is a reflex hammer. To test the patellar reflex, you simply strike the patellar tendon right below the patella. A normal response should be an extension of the lower leg. The Achilles reflex is tested by striking the Achilles tendon. This is the cord on the back of your ankle. A normal reflex should be plantar flexion of the foot. Absence of either of these reflexes would indicate some damage in the spinal cord. The Babinski or plantar reflex is another somatic reflex. This checks to make sure that the spinal cord is intact in the sacral and lumbar regions. You're still going to use the reflex hammer, but this time you're going to use the handle. You're going to draw the handle across the fleshy part of the sole of the foot, starting under the big toe, across under the toes, and then down to the heel. A normal response is for the toes to flex or curl. That is known as a negative Babinski sign. A positive sign, or a positive Babinski, the toes flare. You can't use this to test children under the age of 2. Their nerves are not completely myelinated, so they will give a positive Babinski sign. The pupillary light reflex is an autonomic reflex. Here you need a flashlight and a dark room. When you're in the dark, your pupils open up or dilate. This allows more light into your eye. If you shine a flashlight or any kind of light in the eye, the pupil should constrict. Absence of normal reflexes here can mean that there's severe trauma to the brain, or there's some sort of deterioration of vital brain tissue due to some sort of metabolic imbalance. On the medical shows, when they're testing people with head injuries, they're using a little pen light and they're flashing it in and out of their eyes. They're checking the pupillary light reflex. A blow to the head could cause this reflex to be abnormal, or if someone was, say, found at the bottom of a swimming pool, they're brought up, we start their heart beating and get them breathing again, but if their pupillary light reflex doesn't work, it could be an indication that their brain was without oxygen for too long and has lost some functioning.